Pete, welcome to the stream, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us, talk about art in the industry.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, guys, if you have not been around the channel before, not that familiar with us, I'm Clint.
Diana.
And we're chatting with Pete Mohrbacher, commonly known from his series Angelarium and all the things connected to that. So, to start with, what I'd like to know is kind of, if you could do things over again, what would be different? In particular, regards to how would you go about your education differently nowadays? Since, I think that we're in the same age range, so I know what kind of stuff was available when we were training.
Yeah.
And how do you see that being different? What would you avail yourself of nowadays? And then also, how would you approach the career? Like, would you still get into the same kind of art, or would you do something differently? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the things, this is something I think about all the time. I think about the era of the internet that we first got into, and to me it feels like such a different place than the internet is right now.
Yeah.
And to me that's like the primary concern for my education, because I went to a bad school and I learned most of what I know about digital painting from peers and from tutorials and from learning about free community resources rather than from my college education. The big difference I see is back when we were first coming up, it felt like there was a huge emphasis on just making original stuff from scratch, OCs, wall to wall, everyone coming up with their own original creative projects all the time.
Yeah.
There was fan art. I mean, there was plenty of fan art. But nowadays I look around and I see a lot of the people who are aspiring artists are focused on things like fan art and studies. They're very worried that if they don't do all the studies and really focus on their technical skills and focus on all the resources related to their technical skills, they're going to get left behind. And if they don't do fan art, then they're never going to get noticed. And so I feel a little bit out of place these days because I've never really done studies or fan art. And everyone who's coming up after me, their focus is so totally different. And so I'm out here often advocating, why don't you guys make an OC? And people look at me like I'm crazy. It's something that they've managed to get years into their art education and they've never done. And so I think that the balance is probably somewhere in between. I look this last year I did 100 studies in 100 days, and I got a ton out of it. And I just kept thinking wow, I really wish I had more of this mentality when I was first coming up. But that's not something that I think that the people coming up now are going to be without. And so I find myself advocating for people to do more like what I did, because they already have the part that I don't have. I wish I had done more studies intermixed with my original work. And now I'm advocating people should do more original work alongside their studies, because they are doing too many studies as far as I could tell. I think that a balance between imaginative and study practice is really important. And yeah, I don't think I struck that balance personally.
So when you're talking about studies, what would you put into that category?
I've been doing a lot of photo studies. I mean, not as many recently as I did a few months back, but yeah, I got a lot out of doing photo studies just because it was giving me a lot of repetitions on going over anatomy, lighting, perspective. And even though I wasn't really actively pulling these images apart, even going and spending an hour, 2 hours of reproducing photos in context of also doing imaginative work, I felt reinforced a lot of the my ability to see and ability to mentally project a lot of the stuff that I was working on imaginatively.
Now, as far as the career itself, I know that you're mainly setting in the illustration side. I assume you've done some concept art, or?
Yeah, a bit. I did concepts on the recent Hellraiser reboot.
Okay.
So I worked a little bit in film. I also did concept art for Magic way back in the day, 10 years ago. I did a couple of the concept pushes. So
yeah.
And then I also had a studio job for several years where I was doing. I had a couple of studio jobs where I did concept art. So I have a very different process for my concept work that I do for my illustration. But it's something I haven't done. Is I've done way more illustration than concept art professionally over the years.
And if you were to do it over again, would you still do kind of the same split, carry it over to the side of illustration?
Oh yeah, I've definitely always been more interested in illustration than concept art, even though the thing I like in illustration is something that has a conceptual flair to it.
Yeah.
I like images that express an idea clearly and have design that expresses concepts. And so I've always found myself kind of straddling the line, but I always like to create that like perfectly crafted rectangle rather than just trying to iterate and iterate on an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely stick with illustration. But professionally, the thing I think about over and over again is like, how would I be doing differently if I had just committed to making more of my own stuff earlier?
Mm-hmm.
Because about 10 years ago, I pivoted away from commercial work to just focus on Angelarium full time. And that went really well for me.
Yeah.
And I look over at like, my career. I was doing nights and weekends while I was working in studios. I was working on Magic cards. And I think if I had done, I think I did something like around 50 Magic cards. If I had done 50 more personal illustrations and I had done that during that period in my career, how much further ahead I would be. I honestly think I would be further ahead having done more personal work and developed my own IP further than having spent that much of an effort working for companies.
That makes a lot of sense. We've been like talking about that, like what you choose to put all those hours and your efforts in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think like there's probably, again, it's a matter of balance. Like I think that there is some prestige that comes with working on a big public project like Magic that is valuable for one's career. But it's like, I think doing 50 pieces for me was too many. Some artists have managed to make that their whole career, and that seems great for them. But I think that there's actually a lot of people that I think do it the way that I would have done it if I had gone over, which is maybe do like 5 to 10 and then just peace out because it doesn't pay that good. And there's like, once you're officially established as a Magic artist, you kind of get that label and then you can kind of, ride that for whatever it's worth.
Yeah.
So I probably would have like done the project for a bit, saluted, and then just gone off and done my own thing without making too much of a fuss. That would have probably been the best for me.
Well, let's talk about that. You mentioned several times about putting more time into personal work, building your own OC or universe or whatever it is. How do you go about it? What would be your advice about developing that OC or IP that is marketable? Because I've certainly look at a lot of student portfolios where they do have their OCs, they have their personal characters and their little worlds and stuff, but it has no marketing value.
Right. Well, it doesn't have appeal to the broader audience. So what would you say to someone like that? I don't know if people come to you with these types of questions. Maybe.
Well, I had a revelation this last year about my own choice to focus on Angelarium in specific. Because the question that came up to me a lot, and I'm going to pivot to this if maybe it's useful, that the question was why Angelarium? Like, and how'd you choose that one? It's like there's this expectation I think that people have that they should conceive of a grand idea and then drill straight down on it for 10 years, which it kind of looks like I did. But looking more closely back at my own history, I realized that during that period in college where I had those 4 years where all I needed to do was make JPEGs, it was the only thing anyone expected of me. I developed a lot of little IPs and I daydreamed about a lot of different projects. And I every single time I was working on one, I was like, this is the thing. I'm going to do this post-apocalyptic story about child soldiers in a fantasy sci-fi universe. And like, you guys have never heard of that from me because I committed to it fully, 20 years ago, played around with it, daydreamed about it endless hours. And at some point it just kind of fizzled. And I allowed it to fizzle because it wasn't something that I actually wanted to dedicate, 10 years of my life to. And the same thing with like, oh, there's a sort of music themed sci-fi, thing with like a bug guy fighting robots. Again, no one's ever seen that from me, but if people had talked to me at the time, they would be hearing about how this was the future I was going to produce these animations. I was going to learn 3D. This was going to be my big character. I was going to become super famous. And it's like, I would find myself committing to these ideas and saying, this is it. This is the future. And I would just stay with that until it was clear to me I want to do something else. And then I would dump it and do something else. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere close to the end of college, it was like, I had this idea for drawing angels based off of these angel names. I tried to make some. It went really smoothly. It was very easy for me.
Yeah.
And I had a great time doing it. And the reaction was big. Like, it was bigger than I was doing well on DeviantArt, which was the big thing back in the day.
Yeah.
That was like the place. It's very much at the tail end of its life right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, like I was doing okay on there. And then I started posting these angel paintings and people were like reacting in a huge way. It was, I had good threads going on CG Talk and conceptart.org at the time. People were reacting really big to these angel ideas, and I was having a very, very easy time making a ton of them.
Yeah.
So it's like, it just didn't fizzle. It just stuck. So it wasn't a matter of planning well or like doing market analysis or trying to figure out like a strategy. It was really a matter of me exploring what I wanted creatively, and then investing deeply when I started to have this great intersection of my own happiness as a creative person and a reaction from an audience.
Yeah.
It was like this, it created this like self-supporting loop. So when I see these student projects, sometimes I think there is a certain amount of bad faith that's going into these, where it is somebody wanting to believe with all their heart that this is their thing that they're passionate about. But it's so easy to get caught up in this need to have it be the thing and have it be working when it's really not working for you or necessarily for an audience. It can be helpful to have a relationship with like a mentor, somebody you can really trust, who can give you feedback on these sorts of things. But it's difficult to get feedback from like friends and family or even from yourself to know whether or not the thing that your personal project you're working on is like really the thing you want to spend the next 10 years on.
A lot of times when you see a creative person, be it an artist or even like an inventor, when they're coming up with ideas, like, yeah, you recognize the idea that became really popular and really took off, but most of the time that was only like 1 out of 10 ideas. They had all kinds of other projects and other things that they chased down before that one started getting traction.
Yeah, it's survivorship bias. We only count the ones that didn't die.
Yeah. Would it be right to convey to students that, hey, dive into that project, develop it out, but if it doesn't start getting traction, then try another idea.
Yeah. And not only that, but like if you find yourself really, your enthusiasm for it waning, then allow yourself to be pulled away. You have to ask yourself at that moment, if I don't want to do this, what do I want to do?
So it's sort of riding that line between you have to be willing to commit a certain amount of time and heart into it, but also you've got to be able to let it go if it's just not
working for you.
Yeah, if it's not working for you and like you said, not working for the audience as well, then you really should just, move on to something else.
Yeah, and like I really like this framing because I've had conversations with people over the years where they're like, well, I have this webcomic that I really want to get successful. What do I do about marketing? And I'll take a look at it and I go, is this your idea for webcomic? They're like, no, my sister came up with the idea. And I'm like, well, do you like working on it? No, I hate working on it, but I don't want to let her down. How do I make this the thing I'm going to work on for the next 10 years? I'm like, oh boy, you have bigger problems, bigger questions to answer.
This whole conversation is reminding me of a picture. I don't know if you saw it, from James Gurney. He created his Venn diagram where it was work that you're good at, like that you can do at a high quality level, work that you're interested in doing, and things the market is interested in. But you have to find that sweet spot where all three overlap.
Yeah, because that's what people come generally to us for, Pete, is they're asking like, oh, here's my portfolio, here's my personal work, how can I make money off of this? And then it's like, okay, well, have to think about some of these, right? Like, do people come to you with the same questions? How do you respond?
All the time. My response is always the same with this, which is that I say what you do is you try to make the work that you really care about most and then figure out the finances of it later. Because so often people will poison their personal projects with stuff that they include specifically because they hope it's going to make it more marketable and make more money off of it. And I think that just ruins the appreciation of it. It's not a guarantee, but it's your best shot.
Yeah, that's true.
And if it doesn't pan out, if the thing that you really are good at and you care about most has no market whatsoever, that's fine. You've given it the best you can, because there's no plan B as far as I can tell. Listen, half of the professional artists I've met in fantasy art, they were living off of their partners anyway. Like a lot of people I've seen give talks on how to be a professional fantasy artist. They just had a wife who made more money than them.
Yeah, we actually have this very point, and I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because now you've confirmed it, okay, to the people in here, because we say that in our career discussion and our portfolio sessions that we do after our, the term is over. We do this every term. It's so often is the case, and no one ever talks about it openly.
Yeah. Right.
That people are not sending their kids to private school and buying cars and houses off of illustration work.
This is primarily, this is something that I think is most true for freelance illustration, because there is a bigger career, I think, for freelance concept artists, for people who work in
that's
TV,
not what we're talking about.
Animation, film. Yeah. But for illustration, the market has always been small. And many of the people who I've seen go on stage and talk about this topic, the short answer is, how do you get to the question, how do you get a career in illustration, is you marry a doctor. And no one wants to hear that. It's an uncomfortable truth that's been true for a long time.
Yeah. We sat around the other day. We were trying to think of which illustrator or illustrators do we know of that only live off of illustration and they don't have any other kind of income.
Only off of the commissions, not doing oil paintings or whatever.
Not doing that. Not doing events. Not doing have side income from a spouse or something coming in, and almost none could I think.
There's a list, but the list I've seen is small. There was a guy I knew from a while back. Well, it's a Vera Kid is saying Sakimi-chan. That's a different story, and we're talking about commissions here.
Doesn't do illustration.
Sakimi-chan basically is the same business as me. You know, so the people I've met, people who just make their money off of freelance illustration. They work with an agent. They get fed a ton of jobs. And there was one guy in particular I knew who had a hot streak, and he was making really good money entirely off the commission fees. And, he ended up having to get surgery on his hand in his mid-20s just because he got an RSI. Most of the people I know that is their primary income develop injuries to their hand very early in their life. It's an unsustainable pace. It's not the sort of thing you can do for 40 years in this market. The people I know that had done it for longer were all, and you've probably met a bunch of these people too, guys who are currently in their 60s and 70s, back when commission rates were the same that they are today, but inflation meant that money went twice as far. They had both without selling originals, without having to do events and stuff, they were able to get by off of making $50,000 a year, and they were able to buy a house and stuff.
Sure.
And then, they still get, some of them are still hustling commissions these days, even into their elder years. That always made me want to look for something else and try to figure out something that was going to be, more workable in my elder years than trying to do book cover illustration.
Well, let's talk about kind of where you are at business-wise, kind of income-wise with what you're doing. Now, we don't need to talk about exact figures, but I'm kind of interested percentage-wise, like where are you bringing in income? Like, are you selling stuff online? Is it like a Patreon?
Are the conventions a
Conventions
major
a bigger, yeah.
percentage? Like, we're just curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm totally comfortable talking about this. I actually want to do a YouTube video where I break down the last 10 years of my finances
Oh,
with
that'd
all the
be
numbers,
interesting.
because there's a bunch of those YouTube videos out there and they get tons of numbers. And I haven't shared this stuff because I'm worried people will be mad at me for sharing my numbers. I'm comfortable with it. I just don't want people to get upset at me like I'm bragging or something, because I've
Yeah.
done pretty well over the last decade of being indie. When it started off, it was a pretty even mix. Well, it was mostly conventions at the beginning.
Hmm.
I did a little bit of Kickstarters up front, so I'd say online sales through Kickstarter with conventions. And then over time, it became a more even mix between things like online web sales and Patreon, and then conventions being like half of it. And then 2020, obviously there were no conventions.
Yeah.
I did a lot of rethinking of what I wanted to do. I've got a couple of kids. I've spent too many years on the road,
Mhm.
doing conventions while doing everything else. And so I ended up packing up, and I've done one convention since 2020. I did Lightbox last year.
Okay.
And so I have been 100% surviving off of online sales and Kickstarter for the last 4 years.
So when you're
And I've been
talking
comfortable
about,
with that.
oh, sorry to interrupt. When you're talking about online sales, you're talking about what, like the card decks, or are people buying prints still? How's the market for prints?
Prints used to be nearly 100% of my income from web sales, because I didn't have packaged products to sell. So I had limited edition prints that were the backbone of my business for ages. I bought myself a commercial printer. I bought big rolls of paper. I did all the stuff in-house. I did all the shipping myself. It was the sort of thing it was hard to automate. But I hired a part-time assistant who was an art student a couple different times, local art students to help me out, run the shipping business out of my house.
Mhm.
And that went really well. Once I got a couple of books self-published and I had some card decks, then it was easier to move everything over to a warehouse. And for the last several years, I've been working with a company called Quartermaster Logistics, who does fulfillment for Kickstarters, but they also do day-to-day shipping off of my Shopify store. So orders come in through my Shopify. It's primarily for books, and the books end up carrying me. I did a run, 10,000 of each book, stocked them in a warehouse, and now day to day, it's almost like passive income.
Okay.
Because I don't need to be directly involved in the shipping stuff. And so if I do things like paid ads or discounts or anything like that, it doesn't cause me to have more work. It just has, I'm just focused on, is this getting new sales in? Is this affecting my sales numbers? So I'm in the process of trying to develop more products that I can sell through that same online shop all the time. I just have a new card deck coming out this week, and then I'm going to be promoting that and pushing that along. And it's going to be
I was going to ask you about
my primary
promotion. Is that just kind of going word of mouth? You do have email list? Are you doing paid marketing ads?
It's a lot of it's passive through social media presence.
Okay.
There was a period in the last 10 years where the algorithm was in my favor. And so I built up a pretty sizable Instagram, Twitter following. And so just posting JPEGs on social media was enough to get me in front of enough people to have this constant trickle of sales that's been able to support a family of 4 on a single income.
Yeah.
So it's been a significant amount.
That's great. That's the dream, right? Supporting your family.
It is kind of the dream. It's the reason why I haven't been super open about it, because if I jump into a conversation, start telling people about how much I make off of my online sales channel, it really does sound like I'm bragging. But I'm very proud of it.
Well, it's
really
good for people to know.
This was the goal.
It's not. First of all, it's not easy to do that.
No.
And if anyone thinks it's easy, they don't know how much work goes into doing this stuff. And then, it's good for people to know, because what's the alternative, Pete? Right? It's slaving away for commissions. That it doesn't matter how fast you paint. You can't really achieve a good quality of life just by doing that alone and supporting a family off of that, right?
Yeah, and there was it's always going to be a combination of things. So I do know that there's some very successful freelancers that do a mix of illustration commissions and also concept art.
Yeah.
And some of them do all right with that, but they also typically mix in more independent stuff like online sales, conventions, other ways of building income streams beyond their commercial work.
Yeah,
That's just, we live in the side hustle universe, right? We're all kind of Uber drivers for ourselves. I got into this entrepreneurial thing because I found the challenge of doing all the business stuff interesting. Like, I wasn't thrust into it. I opted to become an entrepreneur because I thought that the dollars and cents of all of this, that like figuring out a marketing plan and how that turned into a business plan, like all of the money talk, I was always one of the people who was fastest to jump into talking about money and business when it came to art, to the point where I found that it was making people around me uncomfortable. and so the people I know who have gone this entrepreneurial route all think the same way about the relationship to the ownership of their art and an interest in the market and the business of it. And the people who hate that stuff, they'll try it sometimes because they're tempted by the money, but they just want to die when they are forced to interact with this kind of lifestyle. And so the question is always like, how do I just do the drawings without having to ever do the business stuff? And there's been a couple of times, again, some people have a spouse that is business minded, that does all the business stuff for them, and everybody else, they just go work at a studio. They were far happier in their lives never interacting with it, even if it meant making less money. There's a lot of stuff we could do in our lives to make more money we just don't want to do. And so if you're an artist and you have that relationship with doing business, that's fine, but it means that certain doors are closed to you and you need to explore different opportunities.
That's the takeaway. There is a lot of other options out there. That's the right way to say it. But you can have a career without doing any of that, but that does mean that you're going to miss out on certain things.
Yeah, but I mean, there's it is a question of like, well, what are we really doing here? Because the goal of our lives is not to figure out how to monetize every minute of our lives in the maximal way. And so to miss out on financial opportunities because they make us deeply unhappy is reasonable.
Oh, for sure.
I think if it makes people deeply unhappy to work on the business stuff, I don't think that they should feel an obligation to participate in it. But for those people that get a charge out of it, I encourage them to dig deeper because there are real opportunities in the indie space. There have been bigger opportunities for longer than people realize. I feel like nowadays we're in a kind of golden era where I see a lot more people following the indie track and doing an amazing job at it, better than me. Even younger people blowing my numbers out of the water, 5 to 1, 10 to 1. Fantastic to see. I love that there are now people who like the same stuff as me who are doing well.
I do see a question there. Are there any jobs for studio illustrators? And we particularly tell our students that there are, but there's way, way fewer of them than there are studio concept artists. Do you see it a different way?
I had an in-house job as an illustrator for a while. I was the art lead on a game called Dragons of Atlantis, which is long defunct, I think. It was like back during the boom of the Facebook game days, back when there was with Farmville and stuff and Mafia Wars. There's still a lot of mobile games that use a ton of 2D art, and they have a variety of different styles. So the mobile game market, I think, is something we don't think of as being as much a part of the industry, but it absolutely is.
Oh, very much.
Mobile game companies need people with illustration skills every day. And also, just below that, I know a lot of people that when they were getting themselves established, building their portfolios, found a very comfortable place in casino, working on slot machine art, because it's steadier, better working conditions than a lot of game studios with similar pay. And because there's like less of an interest to get into those spaces, it's easier to get hired and have like a few comfortable years where you have a lame job that grates on you over time. But pays well and has reasonable hours for you to use illustration skills.
Yeah, if viewers aren't aware, mobile games as a sector, the annual gross amount of money that brings in is more than console games and computer games combined. It's actually 51% of all gaming market, digital games. So there is a lot of money, and there's a lot of titles and products being made where illustrators can be used. Well, talking about juniors who are currently probably working on their skills or building a portfolio, they're wanting to get into the industry. Maybe they're not even sure where they're going to try to find a fit. But what are some of the misconceptions that juniors are coming in with that you see? Just about the industry, about making a living as an artist. Does anything come to mind as common misconceptions?
Well, I think that we can agree that the way you can spot a student portfolio is because it's got one of everything in it. Okay. I mean, that's like the classic is it's like, here's a picture of an orc. Here's a picture of a mountain. Here's a picture of a kitchen. And you're like, why, man? Please just pick something, clearly like you like something, just show me that. And so the student portfolio is always dead obvious just because it's always got too much stuff crammed into it and like rarely a sense of like identity and focus. And so the challenge there is, like I said at the beginning of this interview, hey, it's hard to figure out who you are and what you want to do 10 times more of. The time that you spend when you're learning is experimenting with a lot of different stuff to see where you really resonate and to see what you're really good at and to find some alignment between those two things. And so you come out of that period of like introspection and experimentation with this portfolio that looks like this splatter of half done weak ideas. And then you go, what do I do next? That's the question about fresh graduates from like art school or people in their mid-20s are like, what do I do now? And there is no singular answer to that question.
We actually had a conversation. It's similar. Like it's not exactly the same as what you're talking about, but recently where we were talking about like, oh man, when we were getting started, we just wanted to know how to kind of draw and render and whatnot. And now it's like people coming in now, some of these graduates through these big art schools, like I used to work for one, but now there's more. There's like New Edge and all these other schools. And they come out and not only do they know how to draw and render really well, they also know 3D and they know Blender, they know ZBrush, they know all this stuff, they know how to animate. And I was saying to Clint, like, man, I got into this because I wanted to make some cool images. I wanted to paint things that resonated with me. I don't want to have to learn like 500 new programs to compete with some guy that knows all these things. Like, it's not even fun for me. It's like, do I want to spend the rest of my life on this software treadmill just trying to keep up? Like, not really. So I get what you're saying, that it's just maybe it's more productive to just be authentic to the reason you got into this in the first place.
Yeah, because some of those people, they love that, like, multimodal learning of learning new software and new skill sets all the time. And that's what drives them. And so they're becoming generalists across all these different disciplines because that's where their heart is. And I don't feel like, as somebody who's a bit more of a specialist, I don't feel like I'm in competition with them. And they're going to do things the way they do them. And there's advantages to that. And I think there's advantages to being more specialized and having a very focused interest in just painting. I think that putting yourself in a position to try out all these different software packages and learn, a little bit of Blender, learn a little bit of ZBrush, work for a bunch of different types of clients and try out a bunch of different types of work, private and commissions and commercial commissions. If you're trying to figure all this out, you got to do everything to know what doors you want to close.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what we try to tell people too is, hey, just even if you don't think that's a great gig, just take it. Like you're just starting out. You need some point of reference to see what it's like. You just don't have the experience to tell. So try it out. Try that other new program if you want to do it. Because sometimes somebody will start in 2D, and then they get into like 3D modeling, and then that just really becomes their thing. They're like, man, I love doing 3D. Okay, cool. Do 3D if that's what gets, your creative juices going. But you got to try it out, though.
And maybe you'll do 10 years of 3D and you'll get back to painting.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong
people
with
have different
changing
eras
your
of their
mind.
life.
Yeah. One of the things that I've really had to realize is that as you mature as a person, your goals mature. And that is they change. And it's okay for your goals to change. When I was a kid, my goal was I'm going to be an animator at Disney. That was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw Disney characters every day until I get a job at Disney. But as I got older, I was like, I don't really care that much about it anymore. That's not what I want to do. And that's okay.
On that note, I have a question just to slightly change the subject, Pete. I'm curious just about you and Angelarium. Like, do you see yourself ever exploring any new IPs? Have you kind of put your eggs in this basket and it's going to be Angelarium for the foreseeable future? I'm not saying forever. Forever's a long time, but is this something that you foresee, like creating a new thing, or are you just content to continue indefinitely?
Well, the current format of Angelarium is definitely running close to the end of its course. And like for the last few years, I've been retreading a lot of territory. My big plan for it is to do the third book and, wrap up on some series that have some gaps in it. But right now I've been pushing towards doing a tabletop RPG, and it's technically Angelarium, but the setting is quite different. The setting for Angelarium was never like a very fertile place to tell a lot of stories and bring people in to go and play around with their own characters. So, I've been really interested in this idea of building something that is more like an open gaming world that takes a lot of the design elements and concepts that I enjoy about Angelarium and remixing them in ways that are really different. So I've been thinking a lot about that. I've been getting started on that recently. So it's like a spin-off that is just like a bit of a different genre, something that's more gaming related, less of a mixture between a fine art project and gaming, to make something that's like fully a gaming project that is in a different setting. But so I'm not even sure it's necessarily Angelarium, the way that I'm making it, but it's I think that if I wasn't doing that, I would definitely be thinking about like starting a new project, because I started Angelarium about 20 years ago, and I've been working on it full time for about 10 years. And there's definitely a point where I just found myself just being too repetitive and like not being as satisfied by it in the same ways as I used to. And so I absolutely need to start mixing things up. Some of that is coming in the form of working in different collaborative ways. I've been working on some statues recently, where I'm commissioning stuff and collaborating with people. I've been thinking about, that's made me think about getting into learning ZBrush and like focusing on like seeing if I can learn sculpting for the sake of sculpting. Even if I were to stick with Angelarium, there's definitely going to have to be something that changes about my approach to it creatively day to day in order for me to continue to stay passionate about it.
It's cool to hear. I've been kind of looking forward to seeing something different from you. I'm familiar with all the Angelarium stuff, and I thought, I wonder what else Pete's got in him, what's going to come out. I was expecting something sooner or later.
Yeah, I was just waiting for you to say the movie trilogy is in the works, and you were going to say, hey, Clint, I need some extra art done for the concept, and be like, okay, I'm ready. But
I thought we were going to get into some spicy stuff. It seemed like you guys were excited to get some spicy stuff at some point.
Oh, we can get to the spicy topics. You want part 2?
Cap it off with something, and where I put myself head in the alligator's mouth a little bit.
Well, no, I mean, it's really not that spicy, but nothing spicier than your usual live streams.
Yeah, right.
I'm interested, and answer this however you feel you need to answer. You want to. I'm curious about currently, and I know people's opinions change over time on these things, what you feel about AI at the moment.
At the moment, It's less interesting to me now than it was a year ago.
Hmm.
When it first came out, I thought it was like this. It had a lot of potential for people to accelerate their ability to create art. And then I played around with it a lot, and what I found was that the more I worked with AI, the worse I got at art. Like, it made me like actively, instead of it being like, I thought it would be like this power armor where it's like, oh, it will exaggerate my movements and make me more powerful. And over the time using it, I found my skills like atrophying, and it wasn't even doing a better job than I could do on my own. It was like making worse art, and it was like holding me back in the process. So I'm like, this is actually kind of lame. Some people seem to have an easier time using it to actually make like, build something that was like intentional and like good. But for the most part, most of the stuff that gets made with AI is trash. It's like it's so random. It's like this slot machine. So I think that the strength of it is massively overhyped, and I think that for that reason, some people's fears of it are possibly the the feeling of fear is greater than the actual danger.
Yeah.
But I think there are real dangers on the horizon, and I'm worried that they're not being assessed. Like, there's a big push right now to try to strengthen copyright to protect artists from having their work trained by AI companies. I feel like that's a really bad short-term solution to this, because my understanding of it is that they're going to be able to train these AIs with work that, with images they have like either public domain or they get the license to, for not a huge amount of money. It's not that big of a hurdle to cross. But for if you're a multi-billion-dollar media company, you could easily accumulate all of the rights that you need to train an AI that could undercut the artists that you employ. And so attacking this from like a copyright perspective to me seems pretty short-sighted, because it seems like it just builds a moat around all of the big, rich, powerful media companies that are already,
they already own all the copyrights, right?
They already own all the copyrights, and they're already trying to disadvantage the artists as much as possible. And so AI potentially strengthens their ability to disenfranchise artists. I already think that they've ripped off a lot of artists over the years. Every major media company has done whatever they can to disenfranchise the creatives that work for them: artists, writers, filmmakers, actors, everybody. And we don't have, like, as illustrators, we don't really have a good institution to fight for us because we don't have any unions. Actors, like a lot of disciplines inside film, have unions that were created during a time of studio consolidation. And now that we had, like, in the game industry, as studios started to consolidate and express undue power over their employees, like, there hasn't been a big push to unionize. There's been a bit, but I am surprised that there hasn't been a larger rallying cry inspired by AI to, like, build more unions in this space.
Of course, whether it's national or international, and the illustration concept art industry is far more international than what you would have with, say, Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood, they can only hire certain people from their area. But with this, it's like, even if you got everyone in the US, all the US artists together on a union, they could just hire somebody from the Philippines.
I suppose. I personally think that this is a...
they do that in mass right there from there in China. So
I think that's true to a degree, but I think that if there was a strong push by every artist that lived in the US to not work for a certain company unless they, like, stopped using AI or agreed to certain legal protections, or changed the way that rights work in contracts, that, like, you can try to replace everybody with Filipino and Indian outsourcers, but it's bad for business. And I think that having even if it's not beyond just US unions, I think that there needs to be more organization, labor organization within our industries in order to create some pushback against the desire for these executives at the top of these companies to disenfranchise creative people.
Well,
Like,
say that you could snap your fingers and that infrastructure and system was in place. What sort of changes would you push back to see?
well, I would like to see artists get residuals on projects
Mhm.
where they were contributed intellectual property. I would
So
like
not
to
just flat
see,
rates.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's true in certain industries and not so much in the, the places where we've worked.
I'm curious. Another thing, I mean, I don't think it's related to the AI because it's been going on a really long time. But another thing that I'm interested in like I know you haven't been working for anyone else for 10 years ish. But for those of us who are like the rates are you know what they are. They're the same basically as
Well,
when you
you
were
mentioned
there.
that the
Yeah.
rates really
They've gone up a little bit.
changed.
Yeah, it bumped a little
Yeah.
bit, but not enough even to compensate for inflation. Okay, so like
Right. Yeah.
in
Based
the,
on
in the time
inflation, I don't
period,
think it's higher than when I was working for them.
no,
No.
I don't think so. Well, that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's like if there was an agreement among the top tier artists, but there seems to be. I remember someone saying another MTG artist who now I forget who it was who said that there was a real lack of solidarity in the
Absolutely.
community.
There is
For all
there's
the-
absolutely
for all the
a lack of
talk-
solidarity.
For all the talk on Twitter about the community,
Yeah.
no one really.
Yeah.
I once was in a situation where they had never done artist proofs for like foil planeswalkers before until like 10 years ago, right? And so there was like there was the first set ever, there was going to be foil APs of planeswalkers. And so I contacted the 4 other artists that were in that group and I said, let's all collude to keep the prices on these high to set a market value for this very rare, hyper specialized item to be worth hundreds of dollars instead of dozens of dollars. And I couldn't get 4 people to agree with me,
Yeah.
And it was like,
That's what we're talking about.
yeah, the amount of solid, because everyone was worried. Well, what if I don't get my little corner of the pie? Like there's so much desperation that this idea of using solidarity as a means to advance our collective interest is just not something that there's a lot of will for right now. And I think it affects everything. I think it affects copyrights. I think it affects terms,
It's comical
money.
because some of these people have very collectivist politics
Right.
verbally, but then you
Yes.
actually wanna team up and do something, and no one will do it.
Yes. Super lefty
so-
politics on Twitter, but when it comes to labor issues, they tend to be very skittish about it. And maybe I'm so bullish on this because I have this card in my back pocket that allows me to never work ever again, and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Hey,
But you
that's
talk
the thing,
about
you're talking about people talking about unionizing and this and that. It's like if you can't even get 4 people to agree to do something that will immediately benefit them, how are you going to get all these people on board to advance these bigger goals, right?
This is why I brought this up in relation to AI, because I think that, well, first off, I want to say, hey, the Filipino artists that are perfectly fine making $1,000 a card, it's a huge amount of money. They will love it even more if it goes up to $5,000 a card, right? They benefit from even more. Their benefit is magnified through collective action. So I think that everyone from all over the world benefits from this potentially. And when it comes to AI, it's like, it's this galvanizing force. Basically everyone can agree. I think people publicly think of me as being more pro AI than the average artist. And I'm very comfortable standing out here and saying we collectively need to use this energy that's anti-AI to advance the interests of creative people so that AI doesn't take our jobs and to improve all the stuff that's been broken for a long ass time. If we can use this moment where we all collectively feel passionate about this issue to create rails to advance these issues on, then we have the ability to push back on a lot of stuff.
I really think this is a top-down thing. Like, I don't consider us to be top of the heap of any, by any means. There's artists that are, I don't know. There's like a little collective of the top artists, right? I would say people like the Muddy Colors crew and those types of people, right? And it's like, if those people were to have these conversations publicly, if they were to say these things, I think it would have a real effect.
Yeah. And so, I found that one of my big regrets over my career is that I was always too indelicate about these kinds of conversations. Came on too hard, too forceful, too dogmatic about this kind of stuff. And over time, I have been more open to the different ways in which artists, have their own values and express themselves and want their lives to go. So I think it's important to be empathetic towards people who have different needs and different goals. But I think that people need to talk about this. Like, even if it's not in a demanding way, like if you don't stand up, then you're a coward and you're betraying your brethren. It's like,
it's not about that, but it's rather, what I'm saying is that I think this is a top-down thing. Like, if the top voices don't talk about it, it's not going to happen, I don't think.
I had a request for a commission this last year, and I looked over the contract and I was like, well, it's not going to work for me. It's a work for hire contract. I need to retain the rights. Happy to sell you whatever rights you plan on using this for, but I want to retain the underlying copyright. And the guy goes, what does work for hire mean? And I'm like, it's your contract. Like, he's like, yeah, but what does it mean? I'm like, I had to explain to him what work for hire was and why I wouldn't do it. And he goes, oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we can't. I asked my boss and he said that we're not allowed to change that. And it's like, the fact that, like, it's hard to negotiate with somebody if the abuse is so baked into the system that people don't even recognize it exists anymore. They don't have the vocabulary for it anymore. Like, that to me is the ultimate troubling moment. To go to a point in culture where we're selling away rights and the people who are buying them don't even realize they're buying them because it's so collectively understood that the artist should never own what they make, that it's never even on the table. It's like, the point where we're arguing about this feels healthy. The part where it's so far past the argument that we take it for granted, that is the point where I get really scared. And I think that, like, I would love to see more discussions about this stuff privately so that it continues to advance in a public way. I think it's possible. I really think that creators of all stripes are actually under exercising the influence that they have that has the potential to not only benefit themselves, but their peers. And this is like the main point I want to make, is one of optimism, that like we're holding on to something of extraordinary value. Everybody who makes things has this special thing that that they've got a monopoly on, that nobody else has access to. And that if we can really recognize that value, we have the ability to like make the world a better place for creators of all stripes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good positive note to end the talk on. Good job, Pete.
I'm going to stop myself before I ruin it. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Man, it has been fun. Do you want to, mention any contact information for you if anybody wants to follow you or what you've got going on?
I mean, if people want to check out the work that I've done, I've got a huge repository of it on angelarium.net. I've been doing some teaching also, if you don't mind me plugging it. I've got a little teaching brand called Huckleberry Art Academy. The website for that is huckleberry.art. And we've got a Discord too, discord.gg/Huckleberry. I do a free weekly class every single Thursday where I give out assignments and then I check homework and I give live critique. Those get reposted on YouTube also. And it's just a nice feel-good moment where people come in and they dedicate their time to getting better and getting feedback. And it's such a heartwarming part of my week every single week to come in there and donate some time to work with people. So if you ever want to get art critique from me, you can get it for free. Just start showing up and doing the homework on the Thursday classes.
There you go.
I'd love to have more people participate. We've already got fantastic amounts of participation, more than I can critique. But I'm always trying to like make sure I'm cycling in new people as they join us on those. So feel free to come by.
Very cool. Sounds like you got a lot of stuff going on, guys. Go check him out, see what he's got, and yeah. Till we see you next time. Keep drawing. Thank you, Pete.
Bye-bye. Thank you.